We were in 10th grade when our school decided to take us on a trip to the countryside. It was supposed to be educational, something about experiencing rural life, learning about history, and bonding as classmates. The teachers picked an old boarding school turned hostel as our lodging for the week. At first, we were excited because the place looked like something out of a classic novel, with tall wooden doors, wide corridors, and echoing staircases. But after the first night, I realized there was something terribly wrong with that building. We were divided into rooms of 4. My friends, Sam, Eric, and Jason, shared a room with me on the 2nd floor. The room was simple: 4 metal-framed beds, squeaky wooden floorboards, and a single window overlooking the dark forest behind the school. The first night was uneventful, just the usual joking around and whispered conversations until the teacher came knocking, telling us to sleep. But at around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that creaked against the floorboards. At first, I thought it was one of the teachers making rounds, but then I noticed something strange. The sound didn't fade. Whoever it was seemed to be pacing back and forth, just outside our door. I held my breath and listened, the footsteps dragging slowly, almost like someone limping. Then, just as suddenly as they started, they stopped right outside our room. My heart pounded as I sat up in bed, staring at the thin line of light under the door. That's when I saw it. A shadow. A pair of feet standing perfectly still, facing our room. I wanted to wake Sam, but before I could, the shadow moved again. The feet turned, then walked away, slow and uneven, disappearing into the dark. I told myself it was a teacher and forced myself to sleep, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, I asked the others if they'd heard it. Jason shook his head, but Eric frowned and admitted he'd woken up too. He'd heard knocking on the wall behind his bed, like someone tapping in patterns. We both agreed not to talk about it too much, afraid the teachers would scold us for making up ghost stories. That night, however, the atmosphere felt heavier. The air in the room was colder, and the forest outside seemed unusually still. Around midnight, we were lying in our beds when we heard it again. Those same footsteps in the hallway. Only this time, they didn't stop outside the door. They kept moving, pacing slowly up and down, dragging across the floor, circling back again and again. We lay there, silent, barely daring to breathe. Suddenly, Jason whispered, "Do you guys smell that?" And then I noticed it too, a faint, sickly odor like burnt hair mixed with something rotten. It seeped into the room through the crack under the door. Sam gagged and covered his nose, but before any of us could say a word, we heard the doorknob rattle. Someone, or something, was trying to open the door. The metal handle shook violently, over and over, as if desperate to get inside. Eric scrambled out of bed, grabbed his backpack, and wedged it against the handle. We sat frozen in fear, watching as the knob twisted, shook, then suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable. Minutes passed, then an hour, but none of us slept. When morning finally came, the backpack was still pressed against the door. We opened it slowly, but the hallway was empty, as if nothing had happened. That day, during lunch, we overheard one of the local staff whispering to a teacher. They were talking about the old dormitory building. It used to be part of the boarding school years ago, but it had been shut down after a fire killed one of the students. The boy had been trapped in his room when the flames spread. They said his body was never fully recovered. Some believed his spirit still roamed the hallways, searching for an escape. That night, none of us could relax. Every sound made us jump. Every creak felt like footsteps. At around 3 a.m., we heard scratching, long dragging scratches against the walls, as if nails were clawing through the wood. It moved from the far end of the hall toward our room, stopping right outside. Jason couldn't take it anymore. He whispered, "I'm going to open the door." It's probably just a prank. Before we could stop him, he unlatched the door and yanked it open. The hallway was pitch black, but the smell, that awful burnt stench, hit us instantly. And then we saw it. At the far end of the corridor, just barely visible in the darkness, stood a figure, small, hunched and smoldering as if smoke still rose from its body. Its head turned slowly toward us, and in the faint moonlight from the window we saw its face, charred, skin peeling, one eye completely gone. Jason slammed the door shut so hard the frame cracked. We pushed our beds against it, terrified, listening as the footsteps returned, faster this time, pounding closer until they stopped, right outside again. The scratching on the wood grew louder, angrier, like claws raking furiously. And then, silence. We didn't sleep until dawn. When the teachers gathered us for breakfast, they told us we looked pale and sickly. We tried to tell them what we'd seen, but they dismissed it as nightmares or imagination. We left the hostel the next day, but I'll never forget that final glance at the hallway as we carried our bags downstairs. The walls were covered in deep, fresh scratches that hadn't been there before, and even now, sometimes when I'm lying in bed late at night, I swear I can hear those dragging footsteps outside my door, pacing back and forth, waiting for me to open it. It was our school's annual trip, this time to a historical town with old architecture and an infamous reputation for ghost sightings. The teachers had booked us into a small, family-run hostel near the edge of the town, right beside a dense forest. The building looked harmless during the day, quaint even, but there was something about the way it loomed in the evening that made my stomach twist. I was sharing a room with two classmates, Priya and Rohan. Our room was on the third floor, and the window faced the forest. The walls were thin, and the floorboards groaned every time someone moved. We spent the evening playing cards and joking about the haunted rumors, daring each other to explore the forest. None of us believed it until night fell. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to a strange sound. It wasn't loud, but it carried through the stillness of the hostel. Soft, muffled whispers. At first, I thought Priya and Rohan were talking in their sleep. I shook my head, but the whispers didn't stop. They seemed to come from the corner of the room near the window. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, but then the whispers got clearer, almost forming words. "Leave. Now," they said. My heart started racing. I nudged Priya. She stirred, groaned, and muttered something, but didn't wake fully. Rohan's side of the bed was empty. He was standing at the window, staring out. I called his name. No response. Then I noticed his face. Pale, frozen. His eyes were fixed on something outside. I followed his gaze. At first, I saw nothing but the forest, dark and silent. Then in the corner of the clearing, I saw a shadow, a figure, tall and thin, standing completely still, almost blending with the trees. Its head tilted unnaturally, and its eyes, if it had eyes, seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Rohan whispered, barely audible, "It's been waiting." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Suddenly, the figure stepped forward. Not fast, just deliberate. And then it vanished, just like that. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, surrounding us, circling the room. It sounded like dozens of voices now, all chanting the same words. "Go, before it's too late." Priya finally woke up. She screamed when she saw us huddled near the window. I tried to explain, but before I could finish, the door slammed shut on its own. The window rattled as if something outside was trying to get in. Rohan bolted toward the door, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. That's when the whispers turned into laughter, high-pitched, cruel, echoing through the walls. Then came scratching, like nails against wood, coming from every corner of the room at once. We were paralyzed, unsure whether to run or hide. And then the temperature dropped. Our breaths formed clouds in front of us, and the shadows in the room seemed to grow, stretching along the walls. I could see faint figures now, not just the one outside. They were standing behind the beds, in the corners, leaning over the furniture, almost transparent, whispering incoherently. Minutes felt like hours. I don't know how we survived that night. At some point, the scratching stopped. The laughter faded. The whispers were gone. The door, which had been locked, suddenly creaked open. We didn't hesitate. We ran down the stairs, not looking back, until we were outside in the cold night air. The next morning, when we told the hostel owner, she smiled nervously and said, "Room 303. It's been empty for years. No one dares to stay there. Strange things happen to those who do." We checked the room later during the day. There was nothing. No signs of anyone else, no scratches, no shadows. Just the same empty, quiet room. But I knew what we'd seen. I could still feel it. Even now, months later, whenever I close my eyes at night, I see those figures stretching along the walls, hear the whispers warning me. The forest outside still haunts me in my dreams, and sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I can hear faint laughter coming from an empty room, calling my name. Our school trip had taken us to a remote forest lodge, miles away from the nearest town. The teachers promised us an adventurous experience, hiking trails, campfires, and staying in small cabins nestled among the trees. I had always loved nature trips, but there was something about this place that immediately set my nerves on edge. The cabins were old, made of rough timber, and the surrounding forest was dense, so dark that sunlight barely reached the ground during the day. I was sharing cabin 7 with 3 classmates, Annika, Faisal, and Zara. When we arrived, the teachers handed us our keys and told us the rules. Don't wander off alone, stay inside after dark, and no loud noises at night. Of course, those rules were made to sound exciting rather than serious, and we laughed at them, teasing each other about ghosts and forest monsters. The first night passed uneventfully. We told stories around a small campfire, roasted marshmallows, and finally settled in our cabin around 11 p.m. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy above, casting strange, moving shadows through the gaps in the wooden walls. I remember thinking it looked beautiful until the silence of the forest started to feel suffocating. Around 1:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside our cabin. Heavy, crunching steps on the dirt path leading to our door. I froze, straining my ears. Annika stirred beside me and whispered, "Do you hear that?" I nodded, but we both tried to convince ourselves it was probably just one of the teachers checking on the cabins. The steps stopped. Then came a soft, dragging sound like someone pulling something behind them. My stomach churned. I tried to wake Faisal, but when I shook him, he rolled over, groaning, and muttered something about needing more sleep. That's when the door handle rattled. Slowly, then faster. Whoever, or whatever, was outside was trying to get in. The 3 of us scrambled out of bed, whispering in panic. Zara grabbed a flashlight from her backpack, and we all aimed it at the door. There was no one. I know it sounds impossible, but I swear I saw the shadow of a figure just at the edge of the forest, barely moving. Its posture was wrong, too stiff, too long-limbed, and its head tilted sideways in a way that felt unnatural. Before I could even point it out to the others, it disappeared behind the trees. We tried to calm ourselves. Maybe our eyes were playing tricks. Maybe we'd just gotten spooked by the sounds of wildlife. We told ourselves it was nothing. But then the scratching started. It came from the walls. Not the exterior walls, but the interior ones. Thick wooden planks that should have been solid. Long, dragging scratches, like fingernails clawing along the surface. It moved from one side of the cabin to the other, fast and deliberate, as if someone or something was pacing inside the walls themselves. We huddled together, whispering, unsure whether to leave or stay. The cabin felt alive, breathing, watching us. Every creak, every snap of a branch outside made our hearts pound faster. Then came the whispers. Soft at first, almost drowned out by the wind, but gradually growing louder, forming words we could understand. "You shouldn't be here. Leave, for it's too late." Faisal, usually the braver one, started shaking. "We need to get out, now." We tried the door. Locked. The windows, thick, old glass that wouldn't budge. We were trapped. Suddenly the flashlight flickered, plunging us into darkness, and in that darkness we saw them. Figures moving outside the cabin, silhouettes among the trees, tall, elongated limbs, heads tilting unnaturally, gliding across the underbrush silently. There were more than one, dozens maybe, circling our cabin, like predators surrounding their prey. I can still hear the sound of their breathing in my mind, low, guttural, almost inhuman. Hours passed, though it felt like days. The scratching never stopped. The whispers never ceased. And the figures remained outside, watching, patient. Occasionally, one would tap on the window, slow and deliberate, leaving tiny cracks in the old glass. We tried to stay awake, holding hands, whispering to keep our minds off what was happening. But fatigue overtook us. I remember closing my eyes for just a second, and when I opened them, Faisal was gone. "Faisal!" I shouted. No answer. I scrambled to the door, the handle barely warm, as if someone had just touched it. Outside, the figures had vanished. The forest was empty. For a moment, I felt relief. Then I noticed the footprints, small, perfectly circular, leading from the forest directly to the cabin door, stopping abruptly in the middle of the path. Zara screamed. "They took him!" She pointed toward the forest. We didn't wait. We ran, barefoot, stumbling through the undergrowth, not daring to look back. Behind us, the sound of laughter echoed through the trees, high-pitched, cruel, mocking us. We didn't stop until we reached the main lodge where the teachers were waiting. They had no idea what had happened. Faisal was gone. They assumed he had gotten lost. But I knew the truth. I knew he had never made it out of that forest alive. Search parties were organized the next day, but nothing was found. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no Faisal. Just the forest, quiet and unyielding, as if nothing had happened. That night, back in the cabins assigned for the group, we heard scratching again. Not outside this time, inside our new cabin. It moved along the walls, circling our beds. And whispers came, clearer than before. "He belongs to us. He's ours." We never saw Faisal again. Years later, I learned that the forest, where our cabin stood, had a dark history. It was once the site of a reclusive orphanage, where children went missing mysteriously. Locals said the spirits of those children, or something worse, still roamed the forest, claiming anyone who dared sleep too close to their territory. I can't go near forests anymore, especially at night. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear scratching on my walls, faint whispers telling me to leave, or else. I'll never forget that night. The way the shadows moved, the way the air turned cold and heavy, and the feeling that we were being watched by something that didn't belong to this world. And I'll never forgive myself for leaving Faisal behind. Even now, I can't shake the thought that one day, if I return, those figures will still be waiting, circling, patient, and ready to claim anyone who dares to enter their forest. Because some places, some horrors, never let you go.